So I like to say I've been every type of environmentalist because I have been the preachy, uninformed kind. I've also been the like very naturalist, crunchy kind. I've been the kind that tries to be perfect in my own lifestyle to the point where I thought like if I use plastic, that was the worst thing that could be done. And I like to say that my current evolution of environmentalist is imperfect. And I like to sum it up with this quote that I came up with called "Do your best and advocate for the rest," so that I can combine all of the ways that I have learned to practice environmentalism and put them into one, because I think that the solution to a sustainable future is not about one thing or the other. It is never going to be about individuals being perfect, nor though will governments or corporations act if we show no interest in them changing their actions, because we have to keep in mind that corporations and our government, especially in the US, benefit from the opposite of what is good for the planet. That's how we got here. So while I don't consider myself or really even try to work towards a zero waste life, I still practice a lot of the things that I talked about when I was zero waste, or at least working towards that. But now I also understand that my individual action is not the thing that's going to save the planet. So I thought it would be cool to do a video where I take different zero waste swaps or actions or habits, whatever you call them, and apply my thought process of do your best and advocate for the rest, and tell you how we can do both and how the solutions are not one or the other, but they are both. Now let's start off with the very obvious reusable water bottle. Now, this is the type of thing that I think was like the pinnacle of the zero waste movement, and also something I think that just your average person should have. Everybody should drink from reusable water bottles for so many reasons, including health and costs and pollution and all those sort of things. Like, that's a big deal. Reduce the amount of microplastics you are putting into your body by not drinking out of plastic water bottles. Save a lot of money by drinking from anything other than single-use water bottles. But if you want to have a solution that is beyond what you're doing just in your own home, how you can advocate for things that are out of your control, there are so many ways you could do that. If you work for an institution, or if you work for a larger company or anything like that, you can advocate for water bottle refill stations. That was like one of the biggest things I did when I was working for the Office of Sustainability at Texas A&M. We wanted to implement more refill stations and make sure people knew they were available and safe and good to use. And you see how this applies to the concept beyond why aren't you carrying your own reusable water bottle, and instead looks at, well, why isn't the infrastructure available to make it easy for people to choose a reusable water bottle? Why aren't the institutions making the change that make it possible for us? And when it comes to water, there are so many ways to advocate for public infrastructure to be better, including like more testing for our public waters, better pipes, better recharge zones, better conservation methods so that we have enough water that we can take from the water table. Don't put all the pressure on ourselves to be perfect. Put more pressure on them while also doing what you can on an individual level. Another quintessential zero waste swap, and also something that should just be like normal, are reusable bags, okay? Reusable bags instead of plastic bags. And on a personal level, it can be really easy to shame people who forget their bags or don't have a bag or whatever it is. To put all the pressure on individuals to remember is not the most productive thing to do. It's trying to target like millions and billions of people to be better, while we could also advocate for plastic bag bans. People, when they go to the store, can just grab a plastic bag. It makes it really easy and never really encourages people to work harder to remember to bring their reusable bags. And another one is maybe more realistic with like your local grocery chain, which is to work on reusable incentives, right? So offering discounts, not just not charging for a plastic bag, but offering discounts for people who remember their bags. That's something you can advocate for within your grocery store. You can also advocate for grocery stores to do their curbside in reused boxes instead of putting them in plastic bags or paper bags or whatever people are using. And like I said before, if we don't ask for it as the consumers, a lot of times corporations and governments do not have incentive to change. The goal of corporations is to maximize profits. You have to remember our system asks for that. So without our asking, actions don't happen. You think we just sit back and don't do anything on our part, the individual level, and just eventually corporations and governments are going to do the right thing? They're not. And so when we talk about solutions to single-use plastic bags, it requires advocating for companies to do better. All of these do your best things to me feel so obvious now, but I know to like your average American, they're not obvious. I feel that there are several people in my family that you could ask, what is fast fashion? And they would not know how to answer you. So if the do your best part is quitting fast fashion, there's obvious pushback to that and reasons why that's not going to work on a mass scale. We have only seen the exponential growth in fast fashion brands over the last few years as the sustainable fashion conversation has also grown so much. It's obvious to me that advocating for this on only an individual change level is not working. We have to do our best and advocate for the rest. So what does advocating for the rest look like in terms of the fast fashion conversation? Pushing for standards implemented by governments on corporations, that they have to meet certain standards of ethical labor practices and recycling practices and extended producer responsibility, requiring these companies to take responsibility for the waste that they create. We can also do things like advocate for better repair infrastructure. Repair shops are almost non-existent, and even being able to go to a tailor is almost inaccessible. And textile recycling, actually requiring textile recycling and then requiring that your new products have percentages of recycled textiles in them, and organic materials as well, organic and recycled materials. Advocating that that is something that companies need to be doing. And on the other side, that's kind of like a mix between doing your best and advocating for the rest, is supporting sustainable brands, specifically like the one that is sponsoring today's video, Organic Basics. Organic Basics makes underwear, activewear, and everyday essentials made with recycled materials and organic materials. Advocating that all brands meet these criteria of certifications would be incredible, but obviously we don't have that in our current day and age. So companies who meet standards without it being required are a big deal to support, in my opinion. Organic Basics is GOTS certified, GRS certified, and they put a lot of care into transparency, from their impact reports to their Meet Your Makers factory tours. And they're also part of 1% for the Planet, which means 1% of all their sales go to supporting environmental initiatives. I got a few pieces from them from their Core Cotton underwear line. I've been wearing the Core Cotton Triangle bra and the Core Shorty. They are made of the most buttery, soft, breathable organic cotton with no wires, and it's super comfortable. Feels like a second skin, honestly. They sent over their boxy hoodie from the weekend collection and their straight leg sweatpants, which are 100% organic cotton, which are cozy enough for lounging, but put together enough to run errands. And their true tees, okay, I love a heavyweight t-shirt, and their heavy boxy tee in these two colors are unbeatable for basics. They're made from heavyweight organic cotton, so they actually keep their shape, and which to me also makes them sustainable, is it's a timeless look, not something that you would be purchasing all the time because it's not trendy anymore. I've linked everything in the description, and you can use my code on screen to get a little discount, or the link in my description. And a huge thanks to Organic Basics for being the bridge between the do your best and advocate for the rest, and creating high quality pieces that are long lasting. Composting is something that absolutely everyone should be doing, because it has been found in several reports to be the #1 way to have a positive impact on the climate from your home. Whatever method you use, I don't care, as long as you're not sending food scraps to landfill. The first time I ever attempted composting was throwing all of my food scraps into a bush outside my apartment, and potatoes started growing. But you know what? I wasn't sending food waste to be preserved in a landfill, because that's what landfills are meant to do. They're meant to hold and preserve trash, not break it down. Now, obviously, when it comes to composting, there are so many different ways that we could do the advocate part of this, like advocating that everyone has access to composting. That is the obvious way to make it working on a massive scale. For instance, I recently wrote an article in my newsletter for my neighborhood about how we should not be throwing away the leaves, and we should instead be putting them in our green bin, because the city provides us with a free green bin to make sure that that waste isn't going to the landfill. That is something that should be advocated for on everybody's doorstep. Everybody should have access to that, and advocating for that in your city, asking your city council for it, asking your state for it, asking if you have a sustainability office and they aren't already working on it or trying to find funding for it. Absolutely, that is like step one if you're trying to advocate for composting. But if we look at this topic a little bit deeper and look at the fact that nearly 40% of food grown in the US goes to waste, there's so much more advocacy work that could be done there. Using that food food to feed people who are hungry, obvious. Advocate to create systems that do that. Instead of sending food to waste, we give it to people who need it. Volunteering at places like that who are already working to make that happen. In Austin, if you live in Austin, we have an organization here called Keep Austin Fed, and they literally do partner with grocery stores to take their food that is otherwise going to be wasted and feed it to families who need it. That's a way to advocate for less food waste, is to actually be a part of that process. And there are so many ways to do that. So thinking beyond what we're just doing in our own homes and shaming anybody who's not doing it perfectly because the system doesn't make it possible or easy. And even, you know what, even once the system makes it possible and easy, like we have free green bins in my neighborhood, people don't have the education. So part of the advocate part of this could be educating your community on how to do this and why it matters. There's so much work to be done outside of just you composting. And now this one's a little more broad, but it is just like, don't buy single-use plastic. Now, there are so many problems with that, and that's where my saying comes from, is because I was putting so much pressure on myself and making myself feel bad that I couldn't achieve this plastic-free life, when in reality, it is absolutely the work of the system that makes that impossible for me. I do not have the ability to meet all of my needs plastic-free. Specifically when it comes to groceries, it is nearly impossible to live a normal human life who has to work to pay rent and also be able to meet all of your needs in a way that is plastic free. Our system does not allow for that. And the sooner people realize that and get out of this mindset of like shaming other people for buying a bag of chips or buying strawberries in plastic, we can actually get somewhere. The ultimate advocate for the rest on this topic is something called extended producer responsibility, which means that all of these companies all over the world that are producing plastic, the ones producing the most of it being like the biggest conglomerates in the world, like Coca-Cola, and making sure that they are responsible for the waste that they produce. They're the ones selling their goods in this packaging, and they're the ones who have the money, the resources, and the ability to do something about it. And we've already seen a lot of progress of this happening over in Europe. They're always, decades ahead of us on decent policy when it comes to stuff like this. But it essentially means that saying to people like Coca-Cola, figure out a way to make sure that your materials are being recycled, advocate and fund those solutions, and then also put those materials back into your goods. I know to a lot of people recycling is just like put the stuff in the right bin and you did it, but in reality, if companies are not using recycled materials in their new products, in their new packaging, then putting things into the blue bin does nothing. If those materials don't have somewhere to go after they're recycled, then there's nothing productive happening. And that's what we've seen coming out of other places in Europe, which is to say new products have to have X amount of recycled content in it. And obviously that number goes up and up and up as we find more infrastructure to making that happen. But if the downfall and the impossibility of the zero waste movement taught us anything, it's that the actual solutions are going to come from us demanding that they do more. Because once again, why would Coca-Cola ever just randomly say, yeah, I'm gonna fund solutions to this problem without someone saying they have to? Okay, we should be being vocal about what we do and don't like about what they're doing, because otherwise there will be no progress. Food is a topic I've often shied away from talking about because it seems to give the internet free reign to comment on my body and my weight, and for a long time I wasn't okay with that. I have worked through that over the last few years, and I would say that it doesn't bother me as much anymore. And so I've been trying over the last year to talk more about food for a few different reasons. One of which is food is something absolutely everybody needs. It is something everyone can relate to, everyone should care about, and it should be one of the best steps into the climate movement in general, because everyone has a touch point of it, whether you grow it, whether you eat it. So many jobs revolve around it in tangential ways that people don't realize, and so much of our economy is obviously centered around it. So then it impacts everyone, obviously, and we all have to eat. So one of the ways that obviously the sustainability movement has talked about being more sustainable with our diets is eating a plant-based diet. I fully agree with that, and I have been plant-based now in my life for like 12 years or something, trying to tell like like the entirety of the United States to go vegan. I just don't think that messaging works. And so if we're talking about a way to be more sustainable when it comes to diet, there is so much we can do on an advocacy level to advocate for a more sustainable food system. And I went to a trip to Minneapolis a couple months ago with Farm Aid. It's like a concert put on for farmers, and I was so impressed at the amount of farmers there who cared about sustainability, who cared about small farms, who cared about ethical labor practices and all those sort of things. And they gave us so many different ways to advocate for a more sustainable food system. From where I am, from a farmer's position, from an attorney general. We heard from the attorney general of Minnesota. A farm bill is something that needs to be brought to the floor of the House, and it just hasn't. But advocating that our representatives bring it would be one way you could advocate for more sustainability, because overall, when you think about a supply chain of something like food, right, it's impossible to actually have a sustainable or ethical supply chain when your supply chain is massive. Like, for instance, I learned that 4 companies control the flow of corn, soy, grains, and I think it's pork, beef, maybe it was just meat in general. So can you imagine the amount of oversight they would have to actually create a supply chain that is sustainable versus smaller farmers who can actually see what they are doing and actually have an impact on it being more sustainable? And I think advocating for more small farms and advocating that our representatives and our attorney generals break up these giant conglomerates using antitrust laws, which are just American, and giving more control back to small farms, which inevitably are more sustainable. So that's one of the things, but it's like regenerative farming is super important when we talk about an overall sustainable food system. I'm on the Joint Sustainability Committee here in Austin, Texas, and one of the crazy stats I learned the other day in one of our meetings is less than 1% of the food consumed in Travis County, the county that Austin is in, is grown in Travis County. And that alone should scare the hell out of us. That is so insane. So advocating for more small farms, more local food, more regenerative farming, all those sort of things are absolutely valid ways to actually have a bigger impact outside of just ourselves. So if you didn't already know this, I'm a representative in my city. I live in Austin, and I represent my district on the Parks Board, and then I represent the Parks Board on the Joint Sustainability Committee. And my goal with all of that is to actually have real influence, to advocate for the rest in terms of green spaces, in terms of climate action, in terms of sustainability on a big scale, okay? So people being involved in local politics is really important to me. But obviously, the majority of people's interaction with the political landscape is voting. Voting is obviously important, and that's an individual action. It's not an advocate for the rest. You're not advocating. Voting is you going and doing one thing. It's not advocacy work. But typically we're voting because we want to see the people in power actually represent us, actually represent the people who need help, people who need a better quality of life. I assume that's why you cast your ballot. That's why I do. So that's the individual do your best action, I would say. And the advocating for the rest, to me, is about one thing and one thing only when we talk about it on a federal level. When it comes to our representatives actually representing us, and a topic I'm very, very, very passionate about, but I don't get a lot of opportunity to talk about, is repealing the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United. If you don't know what that is, it is the Supreme Court case that essentially said corporations are people and money is speech, and gave a lot of people, a lot of powerful people with a lot of money, the ability to influence our representatives to no longer represent us, but to represent the wealthy and corporations instead. And since that decision, we have seen it and its impact immensely throughout our entire political system in the United States. Its impact is undeniable. We have to encourage them to repeal that decision. I have been involved in something called Wolfpack for a few years. If you don't know about it, that's one of the organizations I think you could actually get involved with to fight repealing that decision, and their advocacy work basically against doing the opposite of saying corporations are people and money is speech. I don't get to get on my soapbox about it often, so thanks for letting me do that. I'll leave some links in the description if you want to learn more about it. And I have so many more ideas of how I could show you what this means to do your best and advocate for the rest with so many more examples. So if you want to see that, let me know in the comments. We can do a part 2, but that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and again for letting me get on my soapbox about some things for a little bit. And remember, until next time, you cannot do all the good that the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do. Oh, why did I say that? You know what? Actually, until next time, remember to do your best and advocate for the rest. Okay, bye guys.